What is going on, y'all? Robert Sykes, KetoSavage.com, coming back at you with an AMA Ask Me Anything episode. This one is all about carbs around workouts and the sources of those carbs. But before we dive into that, let's roll the intro. All right, so this question is brought to us by Michelle, and they ask, with the 5% carb distribution, is it okay to use things like berries around your workouts, or is it best to leave the carbs coming from sources such as cream, etc., that are just ancillary? Also, is there an optimal training window with keto, like a bro-style diet, more carbs around training, some more fat around training? All right, great question. So I'm assuming the 5%, are you just pulling that from the stereotypical, 70-75% fat, 20-25% protein, 5% remaining from carbs? I don't ever recommend having just a set it and forget it macro distribution first and foremost. So I wouldn't necessarily just have that as like a set in stone 5% of your calories coming from carbs. Also, depending on how many calories you're consuming, 5% as a generic staple could be a lot or a little. Like if you're consuming 3,000 plus calories and 5% of that is coming from carbs, those grams can get pretty extensive, like total grams. So I wouldn't ever really recommend, targeting a specific carb percentage. I would just have a personal, carb threshold, which for me, I generally try and keep it less than 20 grams of carbs a day. That's typically my norm. Certainly less than 30, but usually less than 20, sometimes less than 10 total grams of carbs a day. Now, as far as these sources go, yes, you could have some berries. My wife, for instance, and my kiddo, they love to have a little bit of berries. They'll typically have that with a fat source, like a full-fat yogurt or a heavy cream or something of that nature. I don't really ever recommend carbs in isolation. So if you are going to have them, try and have them with a fat source, which is going to help shunt the absorption of that. Also, try and opt for very low glycemic index carbs. Something like a berry, like a raspberry, is going to be very low glycemic, opposed to something like a sugar, which is going to be very high glycemic. It's going to cause more of a spike in your blood sugar. Also, try and have a fiber with those carbs. So if you're having a fruit, like a natural fruit, granted the fruit of today's standards is much different than the fruit of 500 years ago. There's much less fiber in fruit relative to sugar now than there was previously. But if you are having a low glycemic berry, that's typically going to be accompanied with a fiber that will also help shunt the absorption of that sugar in that fruit. So be mindful of that. But generally speaking, I personally try and just get it from trace sources like the heavy cream, like what's in eggs. Some things like liver, for instance, have more carbohydrates in them. That is just simply coming from the glycogen storing that sugar in that muscle tissue or organ tissue. So I wouldn't really worry too much about things of that nature. Same is true with eggs and things like that. But if you are going to have carbs, try and keep it low glycemic. Try and accompany it with a fiber or at least a fat source to help shunt the absorption of that. As far as the timing goes, you don't really have to worry so much about that. Some people do a targeted keto approach where they will strategically have carbs around their workout, so peri-workout nutrition. I do not do that. I pretty much train in the morning, fasted. I'll have some heavy cream a few hours before training or an hour before training, so I'm getting some fat in there. So I don't really ever do a targeted ketogenic approach with strategic carbs around my training. I don't think it's necessary. If you are truly deeply fat adapted, your body knows how to derive energy from fat metabolism, so there's no need to have targeted carbs for energy purposes. As far as your question about strategically timing fat around your workout, you could do that. However, recognize that fat absorbs much more slowly than carbohydrates. So if you try to have a pre-workout meal high in fat, it will take several hours for your body to fully digest and assimilate that nutrition. You can do a faster acting fat source like an MCT oil or an MCT powder that's absorbed and assimilated much quicker than a long chain fatty acid, for instance. But generally speaking, I recommend having your prior day's meal be your next day's pre-workout, especially if you're training in the morning. So what I have at night for dinner is the fat and protein that fuels my morning's workout the following day. If you're working out later in the day, you could have, some meal several hours prior to that, like a keto brick. If I'm working out in the afternoon, I'll typically have a keto brick in the morning as my pre-workout fat and protein. Again, several hours before I work out. So I would try and time things as such. But generally speaking, if you've got, proper fat metabolism in place, your body's going to tap into any stored fat or dietary fat that you had several hours prior to fuel the workout. So there's no need for you to have peri-workout nutrition of a targeted carbohydrate or fat to fuel that training session. So appreciate the question. You requested some chocolate peanut butter cup bricks, so I'm going to be sending some of those your way. For anybody that does not know how these AMA videos work, if you submit me a well-thought-out question via the link in the description below and I use your question, then I will send you some free keto bricks with a flavor of your choosing. Thank you all so very much. Talk to you next time.